Hello viewers, you are welcome again to my channel. So I'm still on techniques to avoid electrical fire. There is one other important thing that you have to be very careful of when you are doing your electrical work. And this whole thing about electrical fire starts from overheating of cables or overheating at terminals of electrical equipment. Now, one other thing that can also cause overheating that can result into electrical fire is when you have a loose termination or when you have a loose connection. Normally, we run our cables to our loads through circuit protective devices, or sometimes we use connectors to connect two or more cables together. If you are terminating your cable, whether you are terminating it into your circuit breaker or your switches or whatever you are connecting your cables to, you must make sure that the connection is well done. I mean, must be well tightened so that the connection will be very firm at the terminal. Most of the times, loose connections happen as a result of not using the right tool to do the right work. For instance, if you have a terminal that you are supposed to use a hex key to tighten that terminal, and because you don't have a hex key, you want to use a small flat screwdriver to do that. You will do some tightening, but it will not be well tightened. There are times that you need a spanner to do your tightening or to tighten your termination. Because you don't have a spanner, you you want to use a plier, and sometimes the plier may not be able to tighten it properly as the spanner would have done. And so you make sure that if your terminal requires a hex key for tightening, make sure you use the hex key to do the tightening. Make sure you use the right tool to do the tightening. And it must be well tightened. So you just need to do a thorough inspection of wherever you have terminated your cables to make sure that they are properly done, they are well done. Otherwise, with time, heat will be generated, and then heat is what results into the fire that we always talk about. Now, the next thing you have to pay attention to is when you want to use a connector or when you are using connectors, you have to be careful. Every cable in a circuit has an amount of current that it can carry. Now, the load to which those cables are connected has an amount of current that it consumes. In case you want to use a connector to connect two cables together, you have to make sure that the current rating of that particular connector matches the size of cable you are using and has a current rating that is not less than the current rating of the load that you are using. Make sure that the current rating of the connectors you are using is either higher than the maximum current rating of the cables you are connecting, or it must be of the same current rating. If the connectors have a lesser current rating, what it means is that that connecting point, becomes a weaker point in the circuit. And if there is an excess current, that terminal can melt. This is a typical example of what I'm talking about. And so when you are using connectors, you make sure that the current rating of the connectors you are using is either higher or equal to the maximum current rating of the cables that you are connecting to those connectors. If you are doing a termination and you realize that the thread on the screws have worn out or the thread on the screw has spoiled, you have to look for another screw with a better thread
or if possible, you change the whole terminal block.
If you can't change that particular terminal, then change the whole equipment. If it's a switch, you have to change it. If it's a circuit breaker, you have to change it. If you just leave it like that, one day it can cause a very big problem. Now, there are also some terminations, or there are some final connections that require a cable lock to do those connections. Most of the times, you realize that people run a bigger size of cable, then at the termination where they need to terminate the cable, because the cable is big and they don't want to use cable locks, they would have to reduce the strands on the cable. When you do that, then the whole length of that big cable becomes useless, because at the end of the day, you are only using a very small cross-sectional area of that cable. So this is also one very important thing to consider if you really want to avoid electrical fire as a result of overheating. Thank you very much. I'll continue this series, and so I urge you to keep connected for more.